Welcome back to episode 4 of the BaraTheWorld FG NA+T turbo conversion. In this episode, we're going to be installing the intercooler, piping, air intake, battery relocation, exhaust, and fingers crossed, start it up.
Yeah, now this sounds like a lot for one episode. It's because it is, so rather than a lengthy intro, let's go. Okay guys, I'm going to show you how we've installed our Demon Pro battery relocation kit. I've assembled it both pieces together to start off with. I've mocked it in there to get a gauge of what I'm doing, where I'm at. I've ran the cooler pipe previously to make sure everything clears, nothing hits, so it's all good. So all I've done is I've marked a spot here, and then I've grabbed my Sharpie and I've run it along and traced the bottom flange basically. I'll pull it out and I'll show you. So here I've just used a gold Sharpie just so you guys can see. I did actually originally use a black one, but yeah, we've gone gold now. So what I do is I've disassembled this, taken this bottom section off, and I've placed it back on the marks that I've made. I then make indentations, whether with a paint or a center punch or what have you. So I've got my hole centers. I've just drilled them out. The hardware comes with tech screws basically. You can use them. We've opted to use riv nuts. So I've just drilled and riv nutted these. Once that's all done, it's really just assemble. I like to have it a little bit loose, so you get a bit of freedom there, and you just bolt it up. Alright, I've just finished the battery relocation kit. Yeah, super simple, super quick. The only thing that actually needed modifying was the clamp bolts that come up here. They're designed to suit multiple height batteries, so you essentially just trim them down to suit whatever you need. The only thing that we have done differently to the kit is we've got a bit of rubber hose just down here. We've split it on the aircon line here, just to make sure that nothing rubs and causes damage in the future. Now, as you can see, the power cable is loose because I don't want to arc anything across. To connect the power up, all you need to do is run it down and it will go to your starter motor. I've pulled our starter motor out just so I can show you for visual purposes. You are going to have the existing power cable for the starter motor here. All you need to do is undo it and pop it on. And you're good to go. Now with the earth, you have nice simple route. There's an 8mm bolt back here from an existing earth. We've just undone it, clamped it all up, bolted it in, and it's done. The only thing extra that we have done that is not included in the kit is the existing power terminal. Now, this thing is going to be maybe useful for us in the future if we ever convert it back to factory or whatever. You can cut these and rejoin them with crimps or what have you. It's really up to you how you want to do it, but what we've done is we've gone and got some shrink wrap, and we've just shrinked it on there, and we found a nice little tidy spot for it that tucks up in here. And it's quite rigid, it doesn't move anywhere. So we're super happy with that. By the time everything goes in, we're going to be super happy.
So we're just fitting up the Autotecnica intercooler, which slots in between this plastic rad support here. Some of the larger intercoolers do require you to cut these out, but this is a nice slim one that will fit in there without any cutting. Now, they do use these rubbers, which are basically the same as a factory intercooler rubber that slots into these holes. And where the mounting position here, these are locating tabs for the stock intercooler mounts. We actually do need to chop them off for the rubbers to fit in. So we're just going to go ahead and use a quick hacksaw blade and give it a nip. Intercooler is in and mounted. We used M6 bolts with a nut on the back through the rad support, and the reason we went with an M6 is simply because the hole in here is a 6mm hole and we didn't really want to drill it out. It is pretty firmly mounted in there and some nice clearance all around it, but the only issue we ran into was on this bracket here, it was fouling against the aircon line at the back, so we just trimmed it back ever so slightly and no issues. So moving on to the horn over here, it lived in this position here. Obviously it can't sit there anymore, so we've moved it over to here using an existing hole in the rad support, and we've just used the bolt that came from the horn and trimmed it down just a little bit. Didn't need to be that long, so it's pretty firm in there. The wiring loom is nicely in there and not an issue. So if we move down to the lower bit of the intercooler, the power steering cooler lived right here. The NA and turbo ones are different. The turbo ones do sit up top and behind the intercooler, but because we're NA, we've moved it down to underneath onto this member here. So we've just used some riv nuts and bolted it in and left enough clearance for the splash tray to still bolt up and shouldn't have any issues and it won't get damaged. So if we move back up to the top to where the power steering lines will come to, as you can see, the pipes are running through there. They're pretty easy to manipulate around a couple of hoses like this radiator hose, and these are the return lines here. So we've got one coming from the power steering rack that goes into the bottom of the heat exchanger, and it runs around the heat exchanger back up to this hose here, and all we've done is simply trim them down and use some worm drive hose clamps and jobs are good.
Alright, so I've just finished installing the Autotecnica intercooler kit. Was a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle as the piping kit did not come with any instructions, so I'll give you a quick walkthrough of what it looks like. So if you purchase one, you'll know exactly what you're doing. With the kit, it is designed to fit a factory turbo car, so the cool side, it has been modified and is a little bit different, which I'll explain as we go through it. Now, from the turbo, you got like a 180 sort of coming off it to a 45 to a silicone joiner, which has a pipe with a 45 on it, which comes through this slot here, 90 down to a 90 silicone bend, 45 bend to silicone joiner. To your intercooler, out of the intercooler, you've got a 45 to a 90 silicone joiner, 90 coming up, and this is where the modifications have begun. Like I mentioned earlier, the intake manifold is completely different, so there is a bit of modifications here. To clear the battery relocation, I've used 150 millimeters of 2.5-inch silicone joiner to the pipe that comes up here, to an Aeroflow 3.25 90-degree bend step down to a 2.5. This does work. I'm not overly happy with it because there isn't very much clearance here on the manifold. So we will be modifying this after the tune. It's going to do us fine for the tune, but we'll let you know what we end up coming up with.
So we're about to install our air filter and piping to the turbo inlet. Now, since the intercooler piping is on and everything there, you can see it's a pretty tight space. So what actually needs to happen is this power steering pressure sensor here is usually sitting up in a bit of an angle somewhere like here. So that actually needs to be bent out the way a little bit. So if you grab the bottom of where the crimped end is of this hose and just give it a push down, it will bend the pipe a little bit where this bracket is, and just give you enough clearance to get out the way. So we haven't broken one yet, so it is pretty common to do, and should give you the clearance that we need. So we'll install it now and show you what it looks like. We have just finished installing our 4-inch intake. So as you can see, it is quite tight in there, as we mentioned before. So we've used a Raceworks 4-inch 67-degree silicone bend. Out of the packet, these are quite long, so we have chopped them down. As you can see, the bend in there is quite tight. So from there, it runs to a 4-inch 45 stainless to our 4-inch BMC air filter. Now, we had a barb welded on to the stainless pipe here for our rocker cover breather. This runs up onto our radiator support panel, clipped to a couple of the wiring looms here, and over near our battery relocation, up under the manifold, and to our rocker cover breather. So this is what it looks like from factory. We actually cut this piece here and just slipped over our 10mm hose, and that's how it all ended up there. But obviously we mentioned that we weren't going to be doing any welding and modifications. So if you don't have someone to weld it for you, or you can't weld it yourself, you can actually get these breathers to a catch can. They have fittings that slip over the factory rock cover, and same with the back one there, and they run to a catch can setup.
Alright, ECU install is done. It's been installed for a little while now. We haven't recorded it because it's a pretty straightforward process. Basically the reverse of taking it out. Couple plugs underneath, and we've used cap screws to pin it down rather than the ones that were cut. This has been sent off to Hooten's Harnesses to work his magic. He's just chucked a tune on it to sort out the calibration for the map sensor and the fuel pressure reg. This is going to allow us in the future to start the car. We'll be doing it pretty soon. The reason why we want to do that is we want to check for any leaks, oil, coolant, boost, etc. We would not drive on this. It's purely just to idle. We're going to chuck it on a trailer and take it down to Cat and Trent's.
Dump pipe and exhaust is all installed. So this is an off-the-shelf Venom exhaust. It does fit off to our factory position manifold. The only thing it didn't come with is the bolts for the dump pipe into the turbo, which we just use M8 by 25mm bolts and spring washers. So we didn't film the process of installing it simply because it's under the car and there's not much going on other than a couple nuts and bolts, but we'll try and get a shot of it nicely tucked up, and fits great. So we've just taken the spark plugs out. We're going to change them, but whilst we had them out, we thought it's a good time to get some oil pressure into the turbo before we start it up. So they're out, and we'll give it a crank and check our oil feed. There we go. Beautiful. So now that's primed, ready to go back onto the turbo for the first start. Our turbo conversion is finally complete. So before we put the front bar and headlights and all that back in, we're actually going to test for leaks now. So we've topped up with coolant, we've primed the turbo, we've just put 98 fuel in it, all the oils are checked, so let's give it a shot. Nothing leaking so far. Looks good. we just got the headlights in and front bar back on, went to put the splash tray back in and noticed where we relocated the power steering cooler, it was fouling on some of these fins here. So we have just notched these ever so slightly as they were squared off, and now we have some nice clearance in there. Alrighty, so that wraps up episode 4 and realistically the build itself. So we are super happy with the outcome. Car runs great, there's no leaks, and that T51R mod, oof, super crisp.
Now there's just a couple of things that I want to touch on that I don't think we were clear enough in the video. First thing being the battery earth for the relocation. Where we actually told you to run it, it actually fails up on the cooler pipe. The mounting positions are exactly the same still. All I've done is rotate the terminal on the battery and cable tied it up to the mounting points on the battery clamp. It's cleared it beautifully. The next thing is the cooler rubbers. We actually didn't mention that the Autotecnica kit does not come with the rubbers. We actually purchased brand new Ford ones for this video. I've seen other various methods where people use panel washers, bolt them up together, things like that. We actually wanted to use the shock absorption from like the factory item, so it's going to give us no grief in the future.
Yeah, so with all that completed, next episode we're going to be taking the car down to Trent and Cat at Check and Tuning. So we'll be loading onto the trailer, getting onto the dyno and seeing the results. So what do you think is going to happen?
Personally, I've crunched some numbers. Those injectors are not looking good, to be honest, but that's okay. If Mez and I were normally building a car, we would have already put injectors in to have a bit of a safety barrier there for ourselves. This isn't the case today because this video is, based upon finding out the facts and what is real and what is not. So we're just going to suck it and see and go from there.
Yeah, so whilst it's on the dyno, the final thing we're going to check is the manifold back pressure. We did mention this in the first video. Because it's an FG replica manifold, we have got a nice copper coil here to run from the exhaust. So exhaust gas is going to run through this, and before it hits our boost gauge, it will be cooled down and should give us a nice back pressure reading. So to see the results of that and how the car produces, make sure you like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.